Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Chris Lee. Commodore fans, on your feet. It's time to anchor down.
Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our show presented by Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. It is part of the 440 Sports Network. Our guest today will be Andrew Allegreta, one of the two play-by-play voices for Vanderbilt. Andrew appears on the guest line that is presented by Michael Kendrick of the Kendrick Group. Michael is a local carpenter and a lifelong Vandy fan. He builds bookshelves, cabinets, picture frames, furniture, and made-to-order items, including a display case for my prized Dale Murphy jersey. I've seen Michael's work. He's a true craftsman. If you are in the market for custom woodwork, give Michael a call or text that number 615-830-9458. Our question and answer session is presented by Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call. That number is 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Now on to our interview with Andrew. Andrew Allegreta joins us now. Andrew had an exciting first half against Ole Miss to call, and then reality kind of set in the second half. And now a third straight game against a top 10 opponent. Man, this is a brutal stretch with the bye week coming for the Commodores.
Yeah.
With the bye week to follow, just to clarify, which Vanderbilt might need after this coming weekend.
They got Missouri first, so it goes Georgia, Missouri, then bye week, then South Carolina.
Correct.
So, yes. Well, I mean, yes, not just brutal, but historically tough, right? First time in program history to go 3 consecutive games against top 10 opponents, not to mention that 2 of them are either 1 or 2. But, you know, these are the cards as they're dealt to you. And I don't think, Vanderbilt is in the process, and this is nothing new, right? Absolutely nothing new about splitting their ability to judge progress. They are measuring themselves against the best currently, while also understanding what it means to play the long game with program growth. And Clark talked about context during his weekly press conference this week. They're 3-3. They have everything in front of them, whether that means they go out and win 3 games and get to a bowl game, or it wins 1 or 2, whatever it is. I don't think he wants this team to get bogged down in the fact that it's been 3 consecutive games against exceedingly difficult opponents. And to spin it another way, for where Vanderbilt's program growth is at the moment, you can choose to get, and I understand why, you can choose to get engrossed in the second half of the Ole Miss game, or you can choose to focus on the first half of the Ole Miss game. Ultimately, you're judged by wins and losses, so I'm not glossing over that. But again, in the arc of a program growth, there is a lot to be extracted from the first half.
Well, I started thinking about this over the weekend, Andrew, and I wrote about it on Monday. And my dog is going crazy. Perhaps you can hear Oreo, but it never stops. If you look at it this way, okay, there's one way to look at it. Vanderbilt lost by 52 to Alabama and by, 24, whatever, to Ole Miss. And from that standpoint, it doesn't look like progress. Yes, Vanderbilt got wins over Elon, Hawaii, Northern Illinois. Hawaii is probably a bottom 5 or 10 team in the FBS. Northern Illinois probably bottom 30 somewhere, according to the computers right now. And Elon, of course, is an FCS team, albeit a pretty good FCS team from what it appears. And then so you got the wins are on one end of the spectrum, the losses are on the other end of the spectrum, the top 25 type teams and 2 in the top 10. But when you balance it all out, and you start looking at the numbers, Vandy around 90 in most of the computers that I'm seeing, which is an improvement over last year. But I look at it this way. If you look at the offense, it's been really good. It has scored, 25 points in every game except Alabama. Special teams, I was looking FEI special teams ratings. I don't think they've been updated for this week, but Vanderbilt was at 15 heading into the Ole Miss game. I doubt there's anything that costs Vanderbilt spots in the rankings there. Bulovas hit his field goal and has not missed a kick this year and that kind of thing. The punting's been really good. So they're really good right now on special teams, according to the computer that's probably best at evaluating that. They are very respectable on offense. A.J. Swan has not thrown a pick yet, led them to a win, and has been pretty good. I thought was really good in the first half against Ole Miss. Not that he wasn't good in the second half, but game flow kind of took that one over and took that game in a different direction. So right now, really, I think that the defense has just been so bad, it has obscured the others. But if you look at it in three phases of the game, they've made huge improvements in two of them. And now the defense, which is the one that I think we figured Clark Lee would be the most adept at fixing. And in my opinion, it's mostly a talent issue right now. That now the one that when that gets respectable, that's when the program, I think, starts to take a leap.
Okay, so here's my analogy, and I'll see if you bite on this one. It is the equivalent to any other sector making a product. So let's take coffee roasters, for example. The only thing the public cares about is the moment that they walk into your store, they say, I'll take a medium coffee with whatever. And they take a sip, and they like it, or they don't like it. That's the only thing that matters to the public. That's the equivalent of wins and losses. On the back end, there's the roasters, there's the baristas, there's the cooks in the kitchen that are tweaking their recipe, saying, okay, we've got a little bit of this, a little bit of that. That's the progress and the growth that Vanderbilt is going through at the moment, right? So if they're mixing all of their ingredients, they're deciding on the heat that the bean should be roasted at, all of that sort of stuff. Right now, they've got a few things calibrated correctly, whether it's the freshman coming in, A.J. Swan, Jaden McGowan, the way they've played in the red zone, 21 for 21, the way they've been able to stand tall on fourth downs defensively. They've got a few things dialed in that are very clearly correct. And the coffee roasters know that because they take a sip of their coffee and they go, okay, it's almost there, but it's not all the way there. The things that we know are correct are X, Y, and Z. But at the same time, they know they need to go back and fix a couple of things in their roasting process and their brewing process because, yeah, clearly there's issues on the back end, and they've given up far too many explosive plays. Jonathan Mingo has 2 70-yard touchdown catches last week. Okay, so they've got to go back and then they've got to look in their coffee roasting process and their brewing process and, okay, we got these X, Y, and Z correct, but A, B, and C are wrong. So we got to keep working on those. Ultimately, the public only cares about the moment that they grab the cup of coffee, take a sip, and decide whether or not they like it. But the roasters themselves and the baristas themselves understand that the product that they had was just, it wasn't even close to be X, Y, and Z were wrong, and A, B, and C were wrong. Now that they've got X, Y, and Z correct, they can try to take a look at A, B, and C. And it may take time, and nobody in the public should really care too much about all of the mechanical stuff. But internally, they have to care about it because if you can't figure out those things, you don't get to the finish line. The same thing with coffee, with building a computer, with renovating a football stadium, or whatever sort of stuff it is that you're working toward. You have to know your internal mechanisms and logistics to fix it. But ultimately, you recognize that you're trying to fix it so when it gets to the public, it's right. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying? Like, they have adjusted their recipe for brewing coffee here. And they've done a good job so far. It's just going to take more time to continue to adjust that recipe.
No, I buy it. My only question is, can any of the baristas rush the passer right now?
Well, but if you've got a supply chain issue and all of your beans are coming from X place, you may not be able to rush the passer right now until you fix the supply chain and you can get the right beans in, or you can get the right equipment in to change the way that you roast the beans. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we might be working on a supply chain issue right now. We may not be working on just like can I draw up a different play on the whiteboard? That's all.
Yeah, I mean, supply chain has always been an issue for them as long as I've been alive. But speaking of coffee, how about the barista in the press box last week? I'm not a coffee drinker, but I might have to become one after that.
Oh, I did not get a chance to indulge. I was a bit sporadic, but hey, look, I love it, right? I mean, look, hail as old as time. Organization curries favor with media members through food and drink, right?
Yes,
it's not necessarily new, but it was a delightful addition. And I know the barbecue that was up there. I can't think of the company's name, and perhaps I should check a box that they're a sponsor before I say it. Whoever comes up and does the barbecue was a huge favorite of Norm. And as he walked back into our booth after getting a heaping plate of barbecue, goes, I always stay in the good graces of the caterer. Like, you're a smart man. You're a smart man. He gets an extra spoonful of banana pudding, that's for sure.
Yeah, Norm is smarter than he would like you to believe. But
he is. Can we take a second and address? And Norm would get so mad. I say this with love and care. I know he doesn't listen, so it doesn't matter. Because on a side note, because like I know Norm works in the financial sector, and he's worked with significant people, whatever. And I'm like, wow, that person was a client. He goes, I don't know who that is. So Norm is delightfully and probably for his own well-being removed from some of this stuff. But can we take a second and talk about how intelligent Norm Jordan is? He's one of the smartest people I've ever interacted with on a regular basis. I mean that sincerely. He's freakishly smart. And I don't know if people recognize how intelligent he is, but he would tell you that he's just a kid from Etowah, but that dude embodies Vanderbilt education through and through.
No doubt, and a good dude to boot. So,
first class.
All right, let's see. I guess the big topic this week is the running back room, which has taken several interesting turns since fall camp. You have Maurice Edwards no longer with the team. You had Chase Gillespie in street clothes last week, whether he was wearing a jersey, but not pads and not playing, I guess is a better way to put it. So I don't know what that status is. He's not on the depth chart this week. You had the surprise of Rocko Griffin quitting. I can't say I saw that one coming. So right now, according to the depth chart, there's two backs on it. There's Ray Davis, who is getting a lot of work. And there's Patrick Smith, who frankly to me has not looked like Patrick Smith quite yet in his 2 games back. What do they do there? I know Clark Lee mentioned Lutz and some other guys like that might be able to help them, but boy, you're starting to run out of options without getting very creative here.
I think it's a 3-man running back room between Ray Davis, Patrick Smith, Cheeks, and Cooper Lutz. And then I think in your back pocket, assuming things are physically okay, Chase Gillespie becomes a break glass in case of emergency, but one would also have to assume, if at all possible, they'd like to save his redshirt season. And that's okay. Ray Davis had 27 carries against Ole Miss. I worry a little bit about the tread on his tires, considering some of the injuries that he's gone through in his career. Very cool to see today, by the way, as we record this, that he was put on the list for comeback player of the year after his season-ending injuries last year. So 27 carries. I think he's gone over 20 carries at least 2 or 3 times so far this season. I mean, he's physically fit to handle that, but I would like to see a little bit more in that room to help him out. So the double bye this season, it's probably a good thing, like you alluded to after the Missouri game. That's helpful. It's a bummer to see Rocko. Like, I recognize that he was, from a analytical standpoint, probably a really good puzzle piece versus, the name up in lights running back. But I like how he added, to me, he was the most north and south running back that Vanderbilt has. And I like that about him. But, people are entitled to pursue what they desire to pursue. And Clark was very positive and complimentary about Rocko. I think you can start to see it when you kind of zoom back and, we know he's been dealing with a nagging injury, and then he comes off the bye week, and He still doesn't get a ton of reps against Ole Miss. I think he got one carry, and I think at one point I was talking on the broadcast was saying, we'll see if it's going to be, when's Rocko Griffin going to get his turn? He had 117 yards against Ole Miss. Is it going to be Rocko? Is it going to be Ray? And then they trotted out Patrick Smith, and Norm and I kind of chuckled like none of the above. So I guess when you zoom back, you can kind of see it. It's too bad, but you're going to move forward with a 3-man running back room with Ray, with Patrick, with Cooper. And again, assuming health is fine, you could get to a break class in case of emergency situation with Chase. And I don't know if he's played in 3 games or 4 at this point, but he was obviously forced in a little bit sooner than he would like with the situation with Patrick Smith and Rocco's injuries.
Yeah, to Davis right now, he's got 108 rushes and how many catches? Another 17. So he's got, 125 touches. That puts him on pace for about 250. That's kind of a hang on and hold your breath situation there with that kid, just because of the injuries. I think he's done a very admirable job so far.
I think he's physically tough enough, Chris, to handle it. It's just you're mindful of his history, and that's not to say that anything is going to happen. You're just mindful of it, but he's physically fit and tough enough to handle that, and I think he wants to. I think he wants to be that sort of guy and have Patrick be a really good change of pace running back. You mentioned the fact that Patrick hasn't looked himself. Obviously, the 4 games that he missed in the front end of the season, you can see it now. It's like the baseball player. It's like anybody that comes back. The basket doesn't matter. Like if you come back 4 games into a football season and you're playing in game 5, you're playing in game 1, and everybody else is playing in game 5. So you look like you're playing game 1, and everyone looks like they're playing game 5. So he's just going to have to get his engines revved up a little bit faster, which, he's got the SEC speed. He's got toughness. I think he'll be okay. He's obviously still learning to run north and south a little bit more. And, I'm not a football coach. One would have to assume he's getting better at his pass blocking and ball catching out of the backfield and all that sort of stuff. So, but he's on game 2, and everybody else is on game 6.
This season of the Vandy Sports Podcast has been made possible by my friend Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. When it comes to general or cosmetic dentistry services, Jody is the best in Nashville. Just check out his client list. It testifies to that. He sees movie stars, music stars, athletes, coaches, you name it. Jody is the dentist of choice for stars in Nashville, but he sees regular folks like you and I as well. What people love about Jody's office is the ambiance. It's relaxing. It's friendly. Someone described it to me as a tooth spa. Whether your needs are general or cosmetic, go see Jody today. Call him 615-270-2322. See him at 55 Music Square East, not far from downtown or the Vanderbilt campus. Jody is a former Vanderbilt football player and a huge Commodore booster, so go and talk Vandy sports with him while you're there. Go see Jody Jones today. Thank him for his support of this podcast, because without it, this season would not be possible. Back to Davis for a minute. You mentioned the comeback player of the year watch list that he's on. I don't know how you can't root for Ray Davis. I don't know him personally. I have only been around him in a media setting where he comes across as very likable. You read his backstory where he was homeless, had everything against him. Here's a kid who was instead worked his tail off, was a freshman All-American at Temple, got into Vanderbilt, has done well, has come off an injury. I mean, this kid's been through enough adversity, for 20 lifetimes, and he keeps answering the bell every week. Man, I hope he stays healthy, because he is a kid in my mind who just is very much worth rooting for.
100%. I mean, if Vanderbilt was 6-0 at this point in time and ranked in the top 25, College Game Day would come do a story on him. It would be whoever's doing their Tom Rinaldi pieces these days. I don't know if that's Gene Wojciechowski or whoever happens to be doing that version of the story. But you've got one of those stories that if placed in the right situation externally, with the right hook. Here's this guy who is homeless that's playing for an upstart top 25 Vanderbilt team on its way to a bowl game or whatever. You'd have ESPN in here doing a feature segment on him for game day. I mean, it's that sort of story, and he's that type of person. I remember one of the practices in Hawaii. He had a ton of his extended family and friends that were out there at practice with him, supporting him. It's been pretty remarkable with everything that he's gone through to see the support system that has also rallied around him. Like, he's got the Vanderbilt support system, he's got the coaching support system in the same way that they did that with Ricky Wright. But he's got his own support system of friends and family and adopted family members and all of this sort of stuff. He, for sure, like, of all of the collection of parents and families and friends that were out there watching practice, like Jeremy Lucian's family was out there, whatever. Ray certainly had the largest gathering of people. So it's also been nice to see with his story how many people he still has in his corner.
Something just occurred to me.
Uh-oh.
We talk about the depth issues this won't be bad, I promise.
Okay.
we talk about the depth issues at running back, and then sort of Mike Wright makes an appearance again out of the blue. And I don't know that I necessarily was crazy about the spot that they brought him in, given how A.J. Swan was moving the offense. It worked out just fine. They got a touchdown on the drive anyway. But maybe that is part of the answer that the coaching staff was anticipating. I'm not saying that it knew that Rocko Griffin was quitting, but it's not hard to look and say, hey, the depth chart here is getting pretty thin already. There's always a chance we get somebody knocked out with something else. I'm wondering, obviously you're not going to line Mike Wright up as a tailback, but what you can do is use him the way you did last week. And I'm wondering if some of Mike's reemergence in the offense was a product of that.
Certainly possible. I've not asked that question in that exact fashion. Chris, that would be a great one for you to ask.
Yeah, it's good that I thought about it now, a day after the press conference.
I would say that it is a reasonable assertion that Mike, they feel, can assume some of the carries off of Ray Davis. How it gets happen, how it's lined up, how it's organized, and whether his reemergence was a direct result of Rocko Griffin, I don't know. In fact, I would probably hunch that it's not, right? I would think it's more like Mike is a fast, talented athlete, and we still need as many fast, talented athletes on the field as possible. So it's not like, oh, we know something's happening with Rocko, let's get Mike back involved. It's more like, I mean, he's got Mike, like, try to figure out a way to make it work. It still feels to me that they're tinkering on that package and a way to do it where it's truly effective, but also not transparent. And Mike, by the way, like, total side note, and far be it from me, Mike needs to run a little bit more in control. I thought Mike had, like, at one point in time, he could have gotten a first down, but he ran too fast and fell. Again, far be it from me, someone whose 40 time probably clocks somewhere around 8 to 9 to 10 seconds. But he's got to be a little bit more in control on those option plays, read the pitch better, control his own speed a little bit better. If he really hones in on that, then it can be impactful. And I know something I've said on this show too, Chris, before is I still think he needs genuine reps as the backup quarterback. As much as we talk about, Ray Davis, 27 carries, 20 carries, whatever, and what happens. Like, again, knock on wood, fingers crossed, all that sort of stuff. But it's still football, man. And something can happen to AJ as much as we kind of like grimace and hope that it doesn't. But it's still football, so Mike certainly still needs backup quarterback reps.
One other interesting dynamic of the offense last week was Gamarion Carter was third on the team in targets with 6. He's not been a factor yet, really, but I thought that was pretty interesting. Skinner's listed as that third starter, but Carter seemed to be the third option in the offense last week. I don't know if that was just a one-off thing, but that was not something that I really expected coming into the game.
Well, he's got good size, right? So 6'2", 230-ish, something like that. 6'2", 220. You might have the roster in front of you. He's got good size. The point is he can get over the middle. He can be part of that quick slant game that Joey Lynch likes to go to in the right spot. And he settled into the soft spot of the zone a couple of times. So they just need people to take pressure off of Will, to take pressure off of Jaden. And he clearly has helped that. And what he probably, and again, this is just a hunch, this is an eyeball hunch, this is not talking to coaches, he probably fits that middle of the field role better than Quincy, whereas Quincy's best skill set is his speed and the ability to get vertical. And if he's coming off a soft tissue injury, perhaps he's not coming to full speed at that point in time, right? Like if he can't maximize his vertical speed and his route running is still a work in progress, then perhaps Gamarian is your best option, kind of using the middle of the field on the quick slant game. So good size, clearly a good route runner, at least at this point in his progression. So that's been good. And I don't mean to stoke the flames here, but it's a little interesting. And I'm going to regret saying this. Kevin and I looked something up the other night. And it's far too simplistic to just be like, throw to the tight end, throw to the tight end, throw to the tight end. But Ben does not have a game with more than 2 catches since 2020 when he was throwing with Ken Seals. I don't know what that means, right? And that's not a huge negative. It's really not. Like it jumps off the page at you, right? Doesn't have a touchdown past couple of years. Gavin Schoenwald has a couple of touchdowns, and I know you count the snaps, and Ben and Gavin are both out there. I mean, Ben blocking, frankly, might be a byproduct of just what the offensive line needs right now with assistance off the edge, and Ben's a good blocker and Gavin are good blockers, and they need them in that role. They're still playing very, very valuable roles within the offense. So I don't mean to stoke the flames or kind of imply something overly simplistic, but that particular stat, go look at his game log. It's tops 2 catches the past 2 seasons, and then he was 3, 4, 5 catches per game when Ken was the quarterback. Again, that doesn't mean anything necessarily, right? It might not be negative at all, but that particular nugget was noticeable, if nothing else.
Yeah, this is about 3 years in a row I went into the fall thinking he'd be a bigger part of their pass-catching game and just wasn't. Look, some of it's got to do. Will Shepard's been so good. He's starting to hog the targets. I mean, you only get you don't get an unlimited amount of snaps and targets. I'm sure that's got something to do with it.
And I think they need Ben to block, right? He's big, he's strong, he understands the offense, he's good at that sort of stuff. Remember, this offensive line, and I say this, and it'll all go to whatever. The offensive line through 6 games has done a great job keeping whether it's Mike or AJ clean. It's 6 sacks, which I think puts them top 5 in the conference.
Fourth in the league.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not like, you've played 4 games against cupcakes and then you played, the other bottom dwellers of the league. You've played Ole Miss and Alabama. And of the 6 sacks you gave up, 5 were against a team that has Will Anderson on its roster. The offensive line has done a really good job, and I would hunch that the way that they've decided to use Ben and Gavin is to help keep the quarterback upright so that he can actually find Will Shepard or McGowan or Carter or whatever.
Yeah, I think the job A.J. Blazek has done this year has been a terrific one. And here's a question for you. You may have a better grasp on this because you're doing prep every game and starting lineups and stuff. And for me, after a while, it just becomes a blur. Have they had the same starting offensive line combination any 2 games all season?
Maybe
the fact that you're having to think about it tells me a lot.
Well, I'm thinking about the injuries that they've dealt with. Obviously, Hernandez and Castillo have both spent time out of the lineup. We saw Gunnar Hansen miss this past week. Ben Cox has missed time. So if you're talking about left tackle, left guard, center, at right guard. The only one that I haven't mentioned is Jacob Rammer on the right side at tackle. So, I don't know if they've been able to duplicate the same starting five twice, but it's certainly not three times. I would say maybe one or two games they've been able to duplicate it, but as any good coach would tell you, like, as much as people talk about roster turnover from year to year, it's the ability to manage a roster within the season. And I would say whatever they thought they had lined up, left tackle to right tackle at the start of the season, that particular five has not had two starts where they were exactly the same. Now, maybe you've had back-to-back with like Castillo at center, Ashmore at right guard, and Brammer at right guard, and then you still had Hansen and Ben Cox on the left side. Like, you may have seen that particular unit twice, but that's not the one that they necessarily thought they were going to get at the start of the season, right? So, yeah. Blazik's done. I mean, he's a great person, wonderful coach. I sat right behind him on every bus ride over to practice at Hawaii. Just a fun guy to be around.
Well, and I think it's helped that they have rotated. You don't usually see that. I don't recall that I've ever seen an offensive line coach at Vanderbilt. I mean, when you might see a guy sub for a series if a guy's banged up, but like I'm looking and you're having backups that are getting 2 and 3 dozen snaps some week. That's not the way that it's usually been done at Vanderbilt, and I'm guessing. You tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think that's the way it's done most places either. I think that A.J. Blazik seems to have found something here that's working for them.
I'm just trying to counterpoint other offensive line coaches that I've known. Like, I've heard offensive line coaches talk about switchables, much like basketball coaches talk about switchables, or Coach Corbin talks about cross-training. So it's not unusual to know that, a right guard can slide to center, or a right tackle can slide to right guard. That's certainly not unusual. I mean, I would suspect some of your listeners would have context as football coaches about that too. I don't know that it blows me away that there would be a rotation. I mean, yeah, if you could line up 5 guys and go, like, great. I think that strikes me a little bit of a current roster construction sort of thing, where, as with any other position, like, if you're trying to go with the same set of guys all 60 minutes, all 12 games, there's going to be burnout, and trying to get some load lightened a little bit periodically would be a good thing, especially at such a physically taxing position like offensive line. But I defer to more intelligent football minds like coaches and stuff like that on that.
Okay, now for the defense, and that's where they're struggling right now, and particularly in pass coverage. You were there at the press conference with me yesterday, and I'm looking at my notes from it. One thing Clark Lee has said, and I think he said this Saturday and again on Tuesday, I think he feels like their corners are playing okay. Their breakdowns are just coming in coverage where somebody doesn't slide over, or whatever the case may be. Is that how you have taken what you've heard Clark Lee say?
I mean, the thing that I hear him say all of the time is the design and execution. The design being the way to put your players in the best position possible from a coaching standpoint, and the execution is the players doing that. I get the sense that this defense has. I go back to my really stupid coffee roasters analogy, where they've got most of the parts that they would want, but they're not trotting out some sort of fancy $1 million coffee roasting machine, aka a 5-star. So the way that offenses put stress on you these days, it demands, not just wants, but it demands nearly flawless execution for the course of every play over 60 minutes. And if there's one slip up, someone doesn't do their 111th, you're going to get exposed for 70 yards. And what Vanderbilt doesn't have, as good as Ricky Wright has been with his 3 interceptions, as good as Kane Patterson has been to step in at this level, or Ethan Barr's made some plays, or Anthony Orji continues to lead this conference, right? As good as those guys have been, there's no eraser. There's no, what was that guy's name? Scene for Georgia last year, who ran like a freakish, whatever he was. Like Norm would always joke that the defensive linemen run like linebackers, the linebackers run like safeties, and the safeties run like gazelles. And Vandy doesn't have any of those players at the moment, that if someone doesn't do their 111th, the safety races over and just erases the whole thing. Or a Jordan Davis in the middle that Georgia had last year that just blows up the whole play. And because you don't have those individualized efforts just yet through just pure freakish talent, like maybe Clark was used to at Notre Dame or other places, you can't have a letdown. Not only that, but like the other part of that too is, like, this is coaching philosophy and philosophical stuff. But if you are that 5-star freakish athlete, your mental motor can operate at a 5, a 6, or a 7 sometimes and still make the play because your athleticism is that much better. Whereas the Vanderbilt players at the moment, I'm not saying they're bad football players, they could all tackle me into oblivion. But by comparison, their mental motor has to operate at a 9 or a 10. And they've got to do it all game. And my point is, people don't, and this is not like sports psychology, wave the flag. This is just like a factual thing. Like your brain and your brain is a muscle, man. And that's why we're all like mentally fatigued by the end of the day, because you just worked your muscle for 12 hours and you're tired. So if you're Vanderbilt and you've got to execute at a 9 or a 10 all game, your slip up, which is totally excusable because you're trying to execute at a 100% efficiency level all game, you operate down to a 7 and you get smoked for 70 yards, just out of situational stuff. I mean, I'm not trying to make too much of an excuse, but that's the reality. You need 11 guys operating at a 10 on the mental factor, and trying to do that over the course of 60 minutes is not just physically fatiguing, but it's mentally fatiguing. So you take one wrong step and Jonathan Mingo is behind you for 70 yards.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to put it. I hadn't thought of it that way. And not to mention that the brain's getting plenty of exercise during the week with the class schedules. So
your one wrong step isn't just a physical thing. It's a mental thing. And I think if we were all asked to operate at a perfect efficiency within our jobs every single day from 9 to 5, how would that go?
Well, Andrew, I'll give you an example from writing. Okay, I know the difference between THEIR and THERE. I have used the wrong one of those in stories before. Not that I didn't know 1,000 times out of 1,000 which goes where, but sometimes just in the heat of being in a hurry to do whatever, you write the wrong one and you look back and you're like, I have no idea how I did that. That wouldn't even enter my mind to do it, but here it is on paper. I would imagine you take that and you multiply it
too,
yes.
Right? I mean,
right.
You talk for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours consecutively. Not that I am looking for a pity party. Like, I love my job and I would do it 100 times out of 100. But you get to the end of a Saturday, like, my brain is smoked, totally
yes,
tired.
Mine is too.
Yeah, 100%. And that's part of the reason why the broadcasters that I deeply admire are the ones that are so mind-bendingly smooth. Like, I know people get cranky with Joe Buck, but I don't know that I've heard that dude make a verbal misstep in a while. And that's the stuff that I'm like, I'm in awe of those announcers that can go a whole game and not make a mistake. I'm like, how? I'm too tired. Like, I'm going to make a mistake out of just sheer mental fatigue. Anyway.
Yeah, no. And my point is the same thing. Like, I'll go back and listen to podcasts and I'll think, I said this and clearly I meant that, and you hope people will figure it out. Sometimes you get the the comments or the emails like, you don't even know the difference between this and that. Well, no, I did. It's just when you get in the heat of a battle, sometimes it happens for reasons you can't explain. Multiply that on top of the physical fatigue of a football player.
That's right.
And all the stuff that is going against you at Vanderbilt. Now, look, at some point they have to break through and get past that. But yes, when you put it like that, it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and again, at some point in time, the customer has to grab the cup of coffee and go, that's a really freaking good cup of coffee, okay? And this team at some point in time has to break through and just win ball games. But when you get behind the curtain and you understand how the gears are grinding, you can see where the vulnerabilities are. And right now, one of them is just, if your talent level demands that you execute at a 10 out of 10 for 60 minutes every single play, because of your opponent, your one wrong step may be physically induced. It could also be mentally induced from the team. So it is what it is. I'm not trying to make too many excuses, but you're trying to survey the landscape honestly.
All right, last thing, I'll let you go. What does Clark Lee have to slip into Georgia's coffee to make this closer than people think?
I don't know. George is interesting, just from like a pure research standpoint. They haven't. I'm going to list off some random statistics, and they're all going to get busted on Saturday. They have not thrown a touchdown pass to a wide receiver in 4 games. How bizarre is that? Georgia has not thrown a touchdown pass to a wide receiver since Samford. Bizarre. And it's been 3 consecutive games, I think, without a touchdown pass. Again, the laws of football don't require that you throw for touchdowns. You can certainly run for touchdowns. Instead, Stetson Bennett has a handful of those, and the tight end Brock Bowers has run it 3 times and has 3 rushing touchdowns. So they got all the pieces in the world, but they don't. I'm curious to see Georgia. They can win a national championship. Of course they can. Alabama can win a national championship with or without Bryce Young. But perhaps we're gauging Georgia off of last season's historic. Just you watch Georgia's defense in awe the same way that you watched LSU's offense in awe back in 2019. They haven't completely recalibrated. Whether it's the Kent State game, whether it's the Missouri game, whether it's they're what's interesting about Georgia is, and again, one of these guys would be starting for other teams, and I get that. But the horses that they are running with are a lot of guys that have been on the bench for the past couple of years and were good players, but not great players that they could overtake anybody else. They were sophomores going up against other sophomores and couldn't break through. But now they're getting their chance. It's a lot of 4-star recruits, I guess is what I'm saying. They're still very good, right? And still could absolutely win a national championship. I didn't answer your question. I'm sure it would have to be something illicit and appropriate about what would have to go in the coffee. But, it's
not that we're endorsing that.
No, goodness, no. They're just really interesting on paper. I know what the spread is. That's fine. That's perfectly understandable. And those people in Las Vegas set those with very intelligent minds. I'm not saying that I think Vanderbilt's going to get out of there with a victory, nor do I think they're going to beat the spread or fall on the spread. Or I have no earthly idea. I don't know. It's just on paper, Georgia's they're intriguing. Who's there? You watched last year and you saw all of these it dudes. Their it dude is Brock Bowers, their tight end. I don't know that they've got an it dude at running back. McIntosh is very, very good. Obviously we would love to have McIntosh when it's us. That's no disrespect to Ray or Patrick or anything. But so, in the same way that you look at Alabama's roster and go, okay, there's Will Anderson, there's Bryce Young, there's, Gibbs is running like a freak right now. I don't know. I'll eat my words in 7 days, but Brock Bowers is the most physically imposing and like ridiculous athlete on that field.
Yes, yes.
After that, I'm not sure. And they are really, really good players. And it's probably some of their defensive guys. Like they've got, oh goodness, Chris. I'll come up with it he's
Jalen Carter.
The guy that, well, Carter's been banged up. I don't know if he's going to play. Yeah, the guy that had the pick six to clinch the national championship last year is Keely. Is it Riggs?
Keely Ringo.
Ringo, excuse me. So, I mean, he's probably him, or they've got a freshman that's been off the charts in that secondary. It's probably, one of those 3 or 4 guys. But Georgia's been a little bit banged up, too. They're reading some of the Georgia stuff. Do you remember that AD, I think it's AD Mitchell, who's basically their burner at wide receiver, has been dealing with, I think, an ankle injury. And he's been limited. He's not been 100%. They don't know what his capability is for this week. And the Georgia side would tell you that his inability to stretch the field has impacted Ladd McConkey's ability to be a really, really good wide receiver, or limited how Brock Bowers has gotten the football and all that kind of stuff. And, Stetson is really, really good, but he plays with ridiculous confidence, and he's elusive, and he's a national championship winning quarterback. He's also not Bryce Young athletically. So I don't know. It's really interesting. Georgia's great, and I'm not trying to imply that Vanderbilt is going to pull the upset or cover the spread or anything. It's just, they're interesting on paper. They're number 1 team in the country, and you're still looking at them on paper going, what exactly is your calling card?
Yeah. No, I'm with you. They're a confusing team to watch from a week-to-week basis. Andrew, that's all I've got today. Tell folks about the broadcast this weekend, where they can find it, what's coming up, all those things that you guys would like to promote. The floor is yours to do that as we end the show today.
What do I want to promote? I'll give a quick nod because I know, and I may have mentioned this before, I know it matters to Norm, but congratulations to Norm for being named an SEC legend. That's something that's personal to Norm, having played with Alabama back in that 82 season. On a personal note, as we continue to build our bridges, I had a lot of fun welcoming Phil Moore to sing the national anthem. So I'm wishing him as much continued success in his career in this town. And for folks that may be so inclined, not that, we're here to cover Vanderbilt athletics, but we're trying to make the whole fan experience as engaging as possible. I will just say we have a few other items cooking in the kitchen when it comes to that. So we're excited to continue to pursue that sort of stuff. Broadcast time, 1 p.m. across the Vanderbilt Sports Network on Saturday. Make sure you download the Vanderbilt Athletics app. That tends to be the easiest way to get it. But of course, 93.3 Classic Hits here in Nashville. And for those that are outside of this region, we've got an affiliate in Memphis and Chattanooga, and a few other spots as well. So tune us in. We have a good time.
Andrew, thanks for joining us. Have a safe trip to Athens.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We thank our presenting sponsor, Jody Jones DDS. We thank our other sponsors, Sutherland and Belk and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, and that's how we make this work, please email me at chrisley70@gmail.com. We also ask that you subscribe to our website, vandysports.com. That is $99 a year. You get things there that you don't get here. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe where you see our podcast. That helps us get noticed. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at vandysports.com. Follow me at chrisley70. And finally, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel as well. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll catch you with another episode coming very soon.